Hat, sunglasses, Pepsi, notes, sources, thick skin. Check. You already know. Let's go. Golden Blooded is a college football YouTube channel for entertainment. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and let's get into our next college football video. Don't forget to send gear to represent your team. The address is P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. Y'all already know that I cannot stay away from conference realignment for too long. You know it, you expect it, so I'm basically giving you what you expect. Another conference realignment video. But on this particular video, I wanted to focus on the Big 12, the Pac 12, and the ACC. Who's in the best position when it comes to conference realignment right now, and who's going to survive? That's the biggest question. Everybody knows that the Big Ten and the SEC, they're fine and dandy. They have the most money. They're out there shopping. Okay, let's see. Who do we want this go around? SEC, we're going to take Oklahoma and Texas, and then the Big Ten's like, okay, well, it's our turn now. We're going to take, who do we like? We'll take USC and UCLA and make it a coast-to-coast. Yeah, Washington, Oregon, we know you want to join, but we're not ready to add y'all just yet. So they're basically out there team shopping for their conference. So they're going to be fine. They have a lot of money. It's those other three conferences, the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac 12, they're out there going, well, okay, we need to make some moves. Even though we can't shop like everybody else, we still have to make some moves. So who's in the best position, who's in the biggest danger, and who's going to survive? Is it going to be one of these conferences? Will all of them survive? Will two of them survive? Well, I hate to say it, but I don't think all three will survive. Let's look at these three conferences real quick. First up, the Big 12. The new Big 12, not counting Oklahoma and Texas. You got Baylor, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, UCF, and West Virginia. I do think that it helped the Big 12 that TCU made the playoffs this year, but it did not help the Big 12 that they got absolutely whooped by Georgia. That was not a good look for the Big 12, and it made everybody think, well, you know, TCU didn't belong. TCU got exposed. The Big 12 looks like a weak conference. The SEC squashed them like a bug. Yes, that's true. All that did happen, but you can't forget TCU did beat Michigan in the first round. It's not like Georgia squashed TCU in the first round of the playoffs. TCU did get to the national championship, but that was not a good look for the Big 12. I do think that the Big 12 is in a good position. They have 12 members. I think all of their members are fairly happy right now. The Big 12 is looking to expand. I know in basketball they're looking at Gonzaga. We also heard that they're looking at Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State out of the Pac-12, something that would help the Big 12 and hurt the Pac-12. And the biggest knock that I had on that was Colorado. I was like, I'm not feeling the brand of Colorado. Their football program is not looking so good. They just had an all-time worst season, like in the history of college football, not just the history of Colorado. And then Colorado goes out and hires Deion Sanders. If that's not a move to increase your stock, I don't know what is. I think Colorado deliberately did that. And I know they need a new head coach and you have to go out and get the best. But they know that conference realignment is still ongoing and they wanted to improve their brand dramatically. And I think that's exactly what they did with Deion Sanders. And within 24 hours, over 200 high-caliber recruits were contacting Deion Sanders and Colorado. They had a lot of great transfers coming in and their NIL money went through the roof. So that plan worked. It worked to a T. But what about the future of the Big 12? I still think they're looking at those four teams. I still think that they want Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. The biggest question is, can the Pac-12 survive? Because I'm going to be honest, those four teams would rather be in the Pac-12 because they're among their own kind as far as the elitist goes. And whenever I say elitist, I'm not like looking down on them and say, oh, they think they're better than everybody. They're just high academic standards over there. It is what it is. So those four teams would want to stay in that group if at all possible. So it just depends on if the Pac-12 is going to survive or not. I think the Big 12 has an excellent shot at getting those four teams because USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten, that hurt the Pac-12 tremendously. Their stock is plummeting right now. So out of all of these three conferences, I do think that the Big 12 is in the best position. But that doesn't mean that they'll be the conference that survives because these other two conferences could make some moves. All right, let's talk about the Pac-12. Remaining teams after USC and UCLA are gone. You have Arizona, Arizona State, Cal, Colorado, Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford, Utah, Washington, Washington State. The three brands that I think the Pac-12 must keep. They have to keep these three brands. That's Oregon, Washington, and Utah. If you lose one of those, two of those, three of those, the Pac-12 stock goes down dramatically again. Losing USC and UCLA, that hurt a lot. But if you lose even just one of those brands, it might be over. So the fact that Oregon and Washington do in fact want to go to the Big Ten, they put their application in. The only reason that they didn't get in is because Ohio State's like, no, we're good right now. We don't want to add any more members. I don't care what they're worth. We don't want to add any more members. We're good as is. Well, I'm going to tell you something. If the SEC does make another move, and they will, guess what? The Big Ten will make another move as well. The Big Ten does not want to be shown up by the SEC. So if the SEC adds 2 more members, guess what? The Big Ten will add 2 more members, and I do think it will be Oregon and Washington out of the Pac-12, but only if there's nobody available from the ACC. So from the perspective of these 3 conferences, I think the Big 12 is in the best position, and I do think the Pac-12 is in the worst position. Doesn't mean that it's done, over with, they're not going to survive no matter what. They can still survive, but they got to make some moves and get some teams. And the biggest thing that the Pac-12 looks at when they're going to go get teams is academics. Well, they're not going to get any teams out of the Big Ten. They cannot compete with that money. But if you look at teams out of the Big 12, really there's only one that would fit in academically with the Pac-12 since Texas is gone, and that would be Kansas. Kansas has AAU status. They have great academics, but really that is the only school from the Big 12 that the Pac-12 would bring in if they're sticking with their label as far as the elitist. But I think they would benefit if they brought in an Oklahoma State or some of those Texas schools like a TCU, Texas Tech. Texas Tech would be a great addition. They have a top-tier research facility, so maybe Texas Tech would fit the criteria. Maybe the Pac-12 could go after Texas Tech and Kansas out of the Big 12. That would be 2 good additions for the Pac-12. Now, if the ACC becomes available, there's several teams that would fit the Pac-12 label. Duke, they have AAU status. Tremendous academics. North Carolina, their counterpart. Think if the Pac-12 could bring in both North Carolina and Duke as a package, man, they would be a coast-to-coast conference, and you would be getting some great brands. Basketball for Duke and North Carolina's football brand is doing good as well. That would be a home run get for the Pac-12. But they could also get Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has AAU status, and that would be a solid footprint in the Atlanta metro area. That's a great recruiting ground. That would also be a home run pickup for the Pac-12 as well. Then you have Pitt. They also have AAU status. I don't think that would be a home run pick, but it wouldn't be a bad one. You'd be stretching out to the East Coast, and maybe it would open the door to some of these better brands out of the ACC because you grabbed Pitt, and now you have a footprint on the East Side. So it's not a terrible get. And then finally, Virginia. I think Virginia would be a great get also for the Pac-12. And of course, it would open the door to try to get, say, a Georgia Tech, a Duke, and a North Carolina. So there are some moves out there that the Pac-12 can make, but it all depends on the last conference that I'm going to talk about, and that's the ACC. Those 8 teams needed to vote to dissolve the ACC. I'm hearing that they exist, but they haven't voted yet. That has to happen. So if those teams do exist, they have to vote in order for either the Big 12 or the Pac-12 to get any teams out of the ACC. They have an ironclad TV deal and grant of rights up until 2036, but there's that clause where 8 teams can vote to dissolve and wipe away the ACC grant of rights, and then that would open the door for the ACC teams to scatter. Now, for the Pac-12 to get teams out of the ACC, that would have to happen in order for them to get some teams. And I do think that if that did happen, I don't think that the Pac-12 would get any teams. I think for the teams would go to the Big 12, 4 of the teams would go to the Big 10, 4 of the teams would go to the SEC. They would have maybe Boston College and Wake Forest left over for the Pac-12. Pac-12 doesn't want those 2 teams. That wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. So yeah, the Pac-12's in trouble either way, because even if the ACC does open up, none of those teams would really want to go to the Pac-12. Now, for the ACC to survive, they have to convince all their teams to stay. They need those 8 teams to change their mind and not vote to dissolve. And maybe on top of that, get some decent brands out of the AAC or Sunbelt, or try to poach out of the Big 12 or the Pac-12. Are there any decent brands out of the AAC or the Sunbelt that they could get? Well, out of the AAC, you actually have Tulane, and Tulane does have AAU status, so they also have the academics. Tulane just had a great season, but they don't have a history of having good seasons in college football, and their fan support, not all that great. SMU. Now, SMU wouldn't be a bad addition. That's a solid footprint in the state of Texas, and I think they would help the ACC. That's not a bad get out of the AAC. What about Navy? That's not a terrible get, but I don't know just how much it would help the ACC. East Carolina, another North Carolina team, but I don't know how Duke, North Carolina, Wake Forest, and NC State would feel about adding East Carolina. I do think East Carolina is one of the better brands in the state of North Carolina. What about Memphis? Memphis is on the top tier as far as group of 5 teams that could be promoted up to Power 5 status. At one time, I thought the Big 12 would grab Memphis, but now with their new TV deal, there's no guarantee that the revenue would increase on their TV deal if they add a group of 5 teams. So I think that door has shut as far as Memphis going to the Big 12. And then there's USF, another Florida brand, but I don't know how Florida State and Miami would feel about that. What about out of the Sun Belt? James Madison. James Madison. I'm telling you, if there's any team out of a group of 5 conference that the ACC should go after, it is James Madison. James Madison is on a rocket ship right now. Their brand is growing and growing and growing, and I do think it would be wise for the ACC to go out and get James Madison. Just don't know how Virginia and Virginia Tech would feel about that. On top of that, Coastal Carolina, I really don't think so. I mean, they've had some success in college football, but that's about it. They don't make a lot of money, and their fan base is very small. What about Marshall? Marshall. No, if you're not going to grab West Virginia, you're not going to grab Marshall. Appalachian State, another North Carolina school. Well, if you're not going to grab East Carolina, you're probably not going to grab Appalachian State, because I do think East Carolina's brand is stronger than Appalachian State's brand. And then finally, Old Dominion. Old Dominion would make sense if you also brought in James Madison. That would be bringing in 2 teams. But with the division rule out the window and the ACC going without divisions, then really you wouldn't need to add Old Dominion to add James Madison. So if there's any team out there from the group of 5 that the ACC would benefit from if they added them, it would be James Madison. But it would also be wise for the ACC to try to get some teams out of the Big 12. First name, no-brainer, West Virginia. But on top of that, you also get Cincinnati and UCF. Those 3 brands would be tremendous additions to the ACC. I don't know how much it would help for their TV deal, because really they need Notre Dame to join as a full-time football member to really make a dent as far as raising the revenue of the TV deal. But still, maybe it would help with their revenue, and it would encourage those other teams to not bolt. Other than that, things aren't looking good for the ACC. They're not really making any moves. It seemed like in the early 2000s, they were making move after move after move, and they were trying to become the premier conference. Ever since then, it's been kind of quiet around the ACC, other than the rumors that those 8 teams needed to vote to dissolve the ACC do exist. So I think the Big 12 is in the best position as far as continuing to exist after all the conference realignment is done. I do think they will be one of the remaining conferences. I think the Pac 12 is in the worst position, so I think they'll actually be one of the conferences that will not exist in the future, and the ACC is on the fence. We'll see if those 8 teams do in fact vote to dissolve the ACC, because if they do, then the ACC goes with the Pac-12 as far as into oblivion. Y'all let me know in the comments section, what do you think about this subject? Which one of these conferences do you think is in the best position right now, and which one of these conferences, or multiple conferences, do you think actually survives? That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.